Awesome.
Hey everybody. Looks like we've got 14 or so people here. Awesome. Super exciting. Megan, I'm gonna hand it off to you. I just wanted to say hi. I think this virtual co-working workshop thing or whatever we end up calling it is just such an awesome idea for people to actually like get together, learn from one another, like do this kind of like live actual working, not just sort of taking in info, but actually taking action on it during that time. I think it's just such a cool idea. So anyways, Megan, thank you so much. I'll let you run with it from here. And thank you everybody for being here.
Yeah, thank you all so much for showing up. Really am excited to do this and share this with you guys. So I'm guessing you probably already saw in the post that Jimmy made that we're pretty much going to be like working for a set amount of time, and then like I'll kind of explain something and then you'll take action on that. The main thing that I found is usually whenever I attend these calls, I'm like really excited and pumped to take action on it afterwards, and then Slack starts blowing up or something happens and you never actually get back to it. So hopefully by the end of this hour, you'll actually have some work done and will have learned something from it. Yeah, so I guess we'll go ahead and jump right into it. Kind of the reason that I wanted to do this workshop is I started content refreshing a couple years ago, and I found that it was a lot more effective than most content, just kind of creating more content. Specifically, I think I shared a case study that I did where we increased traffic from like 9,000 to 18,000 to existing posts. And I thought that that was pretty interesting, but I also realized that not every single post performed well post-update. So I wanted to understand like what the difference between like a post that performed really well post-update and a post that was sort of like subpar performance post-update. So that's kind of the strategy that I'll be explaining on this call. I also recently did another study, and I'll go ahead and drop the link in the chat. But basically, I found that only about 1% of blog posts actually drives 50% of total traffic, which I thought was pretty interesting. You guys can go ahead and like look at the results that I came up with in that doc. But basically I thought, okay, so we have about 1% of posts producing 50% of results. Well, what if we could just increase that to like 2% of posts? Because that I think would have a much bigger impact on your traffic. So that's kind of why I'm hosting this. Thank you guys so much for coming. And yeah, let's jump into it. So the first thing on the agenda is talking about how you actually pick the right posts. And I found that this is super important because in the study that I did, about 45.2% of the posts that we updated had less than 20 visitors per month before we updated them. And then after the update, those posts only increased the total sum of traffic by 14.8%. So posts with 20 visitors pre-update only increased total traffic by about 15%. But posts that already had at least 20 visitors ended up increasing the total traffic by 85.2%. So the first thing that's really important is to make sure you're picking posts that already have traffic instead of just updating like any old post. Because I know I at least at the start thought, well, I should just pick posts that are struggling, because then if I can get all the posts that are struggling to do better, there's going to be less dead weight on the website and whatnot. But I found that that's just not really the case. It's really just better to go after the posts that already have some sort of traction. So how do you actually identify those posts? I'll go ahead and screen share here. And I do this in Ahrefs. You don't necessarily have to have an Ahrefs account. But if you do have Ahrefs, you can go ahead and put in your URL. I'm just using Snack Nation as an example. And then click on the top pages and then minimize that. Basically, what I'm doing is scrolling through here and looking for posts that are not in the top position yet. And what that's going to do is if we can increase some of these posts, even just like 2 spots, you guys probably already know that you get significantly more clicks by just being in the top spot. So I'm definitely going to be highlighting posts like this one and this one, this one. And that's going to be like the first criteria. But then the second criteria is actually understanding which ones are probably going to drive conversions. So if I look at some of these posts, like healthy snacks, that's probably a pretty relevant one. Like, sure, we might just get some people that are like directly wanting to buy their own healthy snacks for themselves. But hopefully some of those will actually be people that are corporate and want to purchase healthy snacks for their employees. But then if you look at like motivational work quotes, sure, that's probably going to get some HR people, but are they necessarily going to be interested in purchasing snacks from Snack Nation? It's kind of a toss-up. So hopefully you're already tracking conversions within, say, Google Analytics, and you can tell exactly which posts are driving conversions and which ones are not. But if not, just be really mindful of, if we update this post and we drive more traction to it, is it actually going to produce any additional conversions for us? So those are kind of my two criteria when I am looking at blog posts to update. So now I'm going to go back, stop sharing. I think I have a few more people in the waiting room. And if you guys want to take, say, until like, at least in my time, it's 10:15. So the next like 7 minutes, and go ahead into Ahrefs or Google Search Console and look for those blog posts that would be best to update. So I'll put myself on mute and go ahead and make notes of any questions that you have. And then when we come back, you guys can ask me and I'd be happy to help. All right, so hopefully you guys were able to come up with a list of at least a couple of posts that are relevant to this. If you have any questions, by the way, feel free to drop them in the chat, and then I can either look over your list or whatever else you might need. But so the next step in the process is understanding like what you should actually be updating. I've noticed that a lot of people just say, oh, well, we're going to update it and just make it longer. And that's not always the best approach. Sometimes it's that there's a misalignment with the actual search intent. Sometimes it's the posts are too long. So I just want to go through a couple examples of things that you can look at when you're actually doing SERP analysis to understand why your post isn't ranking first. So let's jump into a couple examples here. I'll go ahead and share my screen again. So the first thing is that I notice a lot is that the post doesn't actually align with the searcher's intent. And there's a couple of ways that you might have like misalignment with the search intent. The first one, I updated this post that was targeting storytelling marketing examples. And when you look in the Wayback Machine, this is what it looked like before I updated it. And if you're targeting this keyword, which is examples of storytelling content, you'll notice that there is so much content here. I think it's like 1,000 or more words before it actually gets into the storytelling examples. So like we're still scrolling and we still haven't actually gotten to the examples. They start down here. So I noticed that what was probably happening is people are coming to this page, they're not seeing examples, so they immediately bounce. So when I updated it, I cut a lot of it. You can tell that there's still, I like define storytelling. I had even originally cut this, the editor wanted to put that back in, but then we get right into the actual examples down here. So the reader doesn't have to wait to actually see what they're searching for. So that's kind of one example of how you might have a misalignment with the search intent. Another way that you might misalign it is by just not having the right structure. So if you Google like best Kajabi alternatives, what a lot of people do is they'll create like a landing page or a blog post just talking about what their specific like tool is, why it's a great Kajabi alternative. But when you see the searcher's intent is actually to see a bunch of different list posts. So if you're trying to just rank with a landing page, it's probably not going to work. So if you're updating a post like that, you might have to do like a completely new post, like completely rewrite it. But that's definitely a big one you want to watch out for. Another thing that I find is that sometimes you just need to create more original content. So there's this one keyword, let's see, best B2B video marketing campaigns. And when you look at it, you'll see that this post here mentions a video that HubSpot did. This post here mentions the exact same video that HubSpot did. I believe that this post in here as well. So basically all of these are just sort of creating copycat content. I believe the Slack example, and there's a Hootsuite example that appears multiple times in this single SERP. So one thing that I want to make sure is that all of the content we're actually creating is original, and it's not just, if you're repeating what everyone else has already said, there's really no reason for search engines to rank you above these. So that's another thing to watch out for. Another thing is making sure that it's structured in a way that is productive and efficient for the searcher. So for example, this one's targeting how to measure employee productivity. But when I scroll through it here, it's just, I'm sort of greeted by this wall of text, and it's not organized in a way that is user-friendly. So one thing that I would do is kind of go through all of this content and pick out sort of the key nuggets from it, and then just structure it in a way that's a little more user-friendly. And then another thing is sometimes the post does just lack useful information. So for example, this post that I mentioned earlier only had about 7 examples. And when I update it, I just added 2 more. I don't want to say that you always need to make your post longer. That's not true. However, sometimes it does just need a little bit more depth to be able to really compete. The way that you can gauge that is pretty much just look at about how long the first posts are, the top ranking posts are, in comparison to yours. That's usually a good gauge. But another thing that you might notice is that, say, you're Googling, oh, I don't know, how to purchase a car. And maybe the other posts in there talk about whether you should talk to a dealer or something else. And if you notice basically that all these posts are talking about one specific topic and your post lacks that topic, you want to make sure that you're also including that topic in your post. I don't have a specific example of that pulled up, but I think that you guys can probably get the point. Also, as you're going through this, I want to share with you guys this post. So this kind of goes over all of the things that I just mentioned here. And I'll drop this in the chat so that as you're doing and taking action on this, you can go through and have all of those points listed out there. So I'll give you guys another, I believe this one's going to be 20 minutes. So we'll come back in about 20 minutes. So for me, like 10:40, for you guys, 11:40, depending on where you're at. And go ahead and drop any questions you have in the chat, and I'd be happy to show you maybe where you can improve your content. All right, I hope you guys all had some time to come up with some ideas for actually updating your content. Does anybody want to share some of the updates that they have planned? You can also go ahead and drop in the chat if you want to. I thought it would be fun for me to play along as well, so I just picked some random examples that I found in the SERPs. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And I did a search for, I was looking at content marketing tips for small business. And the first one that I came across was this post, or one of the ones, it was like further down on the first page of the SERPs. And if I was up this, what I would probably do is actually include more relevant examples, or not necessarily more relevant, but more concrete examples. So they're saying, okay, you should have quality over quantity. I would actually include an example of, okay, here's an example of a small business that produced less content and actually increased their traffic, and including maybe a screenshot or some sort of visual aid to show that. I found that that was probably the one thing throughout this entire post is, sure, it had good base level information, but there wasn't really any actionable tips of and examples of how people have actually done that. So that's how I would update something like that. I'd also probably update a different keyword. So right now it's targeting tips for small business, but when I actually look it up in Ahrefs, the keyword that it's ranking for is content marketing for small business, which has more volume. So I would probably just change the entire post structure to a how-to. So that was that one. The next one that I looked for was this one on why content marketing is important. Actually, I think the keyword that I searched was different. It was like content marketing for small business. So this is an example of where the search intent is a little bit misaligned, because if you're trying to rank for content marketing for small business, these people are already convinced that content marketing is a good use of time. Instead, they're looking for like actionable tips on how I can actually execute this. So pretty much this would be a rewrite for me of just, here are some actionable tips that you can take to implement into your small business's content marketing strategy. So those were just some of the things that I came up with. I'd love to have some of you guys share as well, though. Anyone want to drop in the chat? Or if you've struggled with anything, feel free to let me know. I'd be happy to kind of workshop it with you right now.
I'd be happy to share an example that I found, but I'll talk through it rather than typing it.
Yeah, of course.
I'll turn on video. One of the ones that I saw in Ahrefs that I looked through was an article that we have on Facebook Audience Insights. And honestly, it's one that I've been avoiding because the tool kind of stinks. Like they kind of retired it and there's not as much info that you can get from it. But after seeing that it does give us traffic and it is on SERP, just position 8, I figure, well, why not search it and see what the intent is? And a lot of the top ones are actually all outdated, but there was a really good article by John Loomer that basically, his title was, yes, Facebook Audience Insights still exists, and it's the one just above ours. So I'm like, oh, that's actually a really good take on it that we can provide to basically update it and say it does still exist. But what I think John Loomer was missing and what the other articles are missing is kind of maybe some tips on what to use instead, because I understand why people are searching for audience insights and they can't, the reality is that they can't get that information from the tool now. So giving them tips on how to get better audience insights without the tool might put us ahead.
Yeah, I would definitely still always make sure that what you're writing is actually going to translate into conversions. So you might even just want to see, like in Google Analytics, if it is driving any conversions. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that sounds like you've got a great start on that. Yeah. Olivia, you mentioned you want to go next?
Yes, I will go. I'm not going to share my screen or anything, but I'll talk through it with you guys. So I work for a B2B SaaS company that helps people like aggregate their user-generated content. but we are not ranking first for user-generated content. Instead, one of our partners, actually Hootsuite, is. And so something I noticed about their article is that, well, so on our article, like we kind of interchange user-generated content with a dash and without a dash, and like in its full form versus its acronym. So, but they're really consistent throughout. They're just doing the dash. So like with its full form, user-generated content. So I think I'll go ahead and change that in our headers. They also have an intro, whereas we kind of just jump right into like, what is it? So we could include an intro. Also, their word count is about half of ours, so we could shorten ours. And they have a table of contents, whereas we don't. So I'd include that. And then it's also like 2 years outdated, so adding some 2022 examples.
Yeah.
And then another blog that we're actually like on the featured snippet for is like our hashtag examples blog. But we're not technically ranking first. There are actually 2 featured snippets, which is kind of weird. So we're the second one. So I realized that this blog is from like 2015. So I would basically just create a whole new article of like 2022 examples, and keeping it in the same listicle format, which Google obviously liked. I mean, Google obviously liked like the majority of the blog. It's just a little bit outdated. So a question for you I have, Megan, is like, if it is going to be a lot of significant changes and like really drastically like changing like the length or updating the examples, like, do we just create an entirely new blog post and delete the old one?
So I would just pretty much like, if you're inside of WordPress, delete all the content that currently exists and then just paste the new content in, but I wouldn't create like a different URL, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But yeah, that's actually another thing that in the single grain case study I mentioned is I was always worried, like, if you change too much, does that mean that Google's just going to like tank you in the rankings? And I found that overall, I tend to change like more than 50% of the article, sometimes like 90, 85%, and it's typically fine. So if any of you guys are worried about that, don't worry about changing too much. I really like your ideas of updating all the examples to be newer. I find that just changing like certain keywords within the post doesn't always produce that much of a impact unless like it's in the title. But I think updating those examples sounds like a great idea, Olivia.
So it wouldn't make a big difference like to change the headers like throughout the post is what you're saying?
So pretty much like there's one post I did that was like 31 best digital marketing examples. And I changed every single example in there. So like 95% of the text of the post, and Google didn't care. It actually ranked it much higher. So if you change the headers, the actual content, whatever, like that's fine, but just make sure it's on the same URL. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Gotcha. Okay. So then like if we don't create a new post, like doesn't like wouldn't Google like look at the dates, and isn't that a factor in like who they choose to rank? So wouldn't it be a little bit of a benefit to create a new post?
So it can actually usually tell. So if sometimes people go in there and just update the actual date, and Google can tell that you just updated the actual date and won't actually count it as like a refresh piece of content. Usually what companies will do is just keep that same URL, and then Google can see that it's constantly being updated. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Anybody else want to go? I think Lauren, I might have cut you off. Is that true?
Oh, I gave my example.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Does anybody else want to share? All right. Well, if you guys have any additional questions, you can always hit me up in Superpath. Also, please feel free to give me feedback on sort of how this went. I have a couple ideas of things that I might be able to do to organize it a little better. I felt like I kind of just threw a lot of information at you guys. So maybe like creating some sort of a handout or something to give you guys either before or afterwards. But yeah, Jimmy and I always want to improve this, make it a better experience. And thank you so much for showing up. This was really fun. I enjoyed talking with other content marketers. Jimmy, are you on here?
I am, yeah. That was awesome. Thanks so much, Megan. Seriously appreciate it. If people have feedback, please send it our way. You can send Megan or I DMs in Slack. This is something we want to do more of, but we also want to make sure it's fine-tuned and it's super valuable to everybody. I think this definitely was, but send us whatever you think so that we can continue to iterate and make these awesome.
All right, that sounds great. Unless you have anything else to add, I think we can wrap it up here.
Cool.
All right, thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks
Thanks,
everybody.
Megan.
Thank you,
Bye.
Megan.